The epistle reading is 1 Corinthians chapter 13, beginning with the first verse. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For our knowledge is imperfect, our prophecy is imperfect. But when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall understand fully, even as I have been fully understood. So faith, hope, love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. This is the word of God for the people of God.
So this is interesting. This is clearly one of the most famous passages in the Bible. I don't think I have ever preached on it. We often hear it read at weddings. Weddings are always interesting. You know, something always happens. I always tell couples that when we got to say, something's going to go wrong. I hope it's not my part, but it's the kind of thing we laugh about later. Don't worry about it. Sometimes things go catastrophically wrong. At weddings, I thought I would regale you with some stories, but we don't have time. Well, there are some funny things, actually. I've had various kinds of people faint. I had this best man who fainted. I mean, usually when people faint, they kind of crumble to the floor. This guy, he fell like a tree, just bam, he was out. We had to call an ambulance. It's awful. Had a groom one time who fainted. We're about to come in. Like the music's playing, it's time to open the door and come in. He crumbles to the floor. I'm like, dude, he can't stand up. So I said, have you eaten today? He said, no. I said, have you been drinking today? He said, yeah, I had 3 gin and tonics. Like he couldn't stand up. So we can't walk in. So I had to walk around. I found the bride and I said, he is not smart enough to be a husband. Walking down the hall, I thought about this other wedding that I did here. This is the one time I remember thinking distinctly, I'm so glad I'm not the groom in this wedding. I don't usually have that thought. So we're here, and so we start the wedding, and the guy does his little vow thing first, and when he finishes, she says, good job. And I do my little prayer, and she says, good job. Organ plays. Good job. I was glad I was not the groom in that case. I mean, weddings, it's just something, and I've talked about this. It's a big issue in our society, who can marry and who shouldn't marry, and I've talked about this before, but it's just so important to get right. I mean, if we're going to talk about marriage in the church, right, it's about this love. It is about this love thing that Paul talks about, but it's also, it's not this, there's just the parties and all, it's just so, it's just so way over the top, and I frankly don't care if gays or straights do that. I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in like Christian marriage. That what do we do? Are we doing something for God here? Is it holy in some way? But then none of that matters, because actually when Paul wrote this, Paul didn't think, I need to write a poem so they'll have something to read at weddings. That's not Paul's purpose. What Paul was doing, this is so interesting. He's writing a letter to the church at Corinth, and we know what's going on in the church in Corinth. They're a mess. They are a disaster of a church. They are fractured. They have disagreements. They're anxious. They got a lot of people in this church who say, I'm right and the other people are wrong. This church is full of people like that. They even got a few of these people, you know the type, they're sort of martyrs. You know, Paul talks about this business of if I give away all I have, if I deliver my body to be burned. I mean, I think he's talking about the kind of people that, you know, on the Enneagram, they're number 2. They're the people they serve, they work hard, but they want you to know about it. They want you to notice how much they've done for you. They wouldn't say you owe them, but you feel like you owe them. They're just martyrs. You know the kind of people? Paul's got people like this, and to all of those people, they're right, and they're martyrs, and they're divided, and they're anxious, Paul says, how about love? Let's do the love thing. It's a poetic wonder, and what this poetic wonder is about, it's how you live for God. This is how the people of God live. They love. It's not a combustible feeling that happens or it doesn't. It's a way of life. It's a commitment. It's a discipline. It's a habit. That doesn't make it sound less good. That makes it sound better, right? It's a discipline. It's a way of life. It's what God's people do. Actually, these words describe Jesus pretty well, don't they? We could take out love and substitute Jesus, and the poem would work wonderfully. Jesus was patient and kind. Jesus was not jealous or boastful. Jesus was not arrogant or rude. Jesus was not irritable or resentful. Jesus bore all things, hoped all things, endured all things. Mother's Day is coming up, and I think about the love between Jesus and his mother Mary. There's a patience, kindness. How do we love? Paul's talking about how Christians love. We love within the church. One of the things that I love about this church is the way that we love here. People here often, when they talk about their church, they don't say, oh, it's a pretty building. It is a pretty building. But people say, I love the church. I love the people of the church. I love this church. I love the people of this church. And love happens here in just so many ways that are precious. We're observing Stephen ministry today, and there's just so much love through this program. I could regale you with various stories, but, you know, 2 come to mind. One is, there actually were 2 guys that traveled to Italy with me a couple years ago on one of my pilgrimages, and one was a Stephen minister, but he was just a fellow travel with this other guy who he knew as, well, he was an MIT grad, had a house at the beach, tall, handsome, funny, great traveler. We had a blast together. But then he came down with cancer, and so the Stephen minister began visiting him and was very diligent, just attended to him so well. And I think on their last or next to last visit, when the man had become increasingly disabled, the Stephen minister said to him, you know, I wish I could do more for you. And the guy said back to him, I wish I could do more for you. Right? It's just such a privilege to share in life that way. It's love. There's another story about a guy, he'd been married for 20 years, and then his wife just left him and said that he'd been an awful person, and he'd really tried, and he was devastated, and he felt like his whole life had been a waste. He couldn't figure out how to move forward, and he got a Stephen minister, and the Stephen minister kept talking to him and encouraging him and caring for him and loving him. The guy gradually began to recover himself and his sense that life is worthwhile. My life has not been a waste. I actually can move forward. So in their last meeting, the Stephen minister said to him, you know, I've got to give you a lot of credit for the progress that you've made. And the guy said, no, I've got to give you the credit for what you did for me. He said, no, they're having an argument about who gets the credit on this thing, right? It's just so much love. How do we love? How do you love within family in this way? How do you love your neighbor? Jesus said that, right? Jesus said, love your neighbor. And that's not just the guy next door. You may be relieved of that because the guy next door might be really difficult to love indeed. But it's not just the guy next door. When Jesus says, love your neighbor, he says, well, your neighbor's the person that's kind of difficult and kind of prickly and you don't really want to love them. And everybody in the world would tell you shouldn't love that person because that person's wrong or difficult or obnoxious or whatever. But Jesus says, love your neighbor, love the stranger, love the alien, love the person who's different. How do you love at work? That'd be novel, wouldn't it, right? Is that like you're the one at work that they say, wow, she loves, right? In your job evaluation, like he really loves at work. How do you love in the world? You know, we have problems in the world, and nobody talks about love. Everybody talks about, you got to pass laws, you got to have a military, you got to be strong. We do all this stuff. But we have a pope now, right? Pope Francis says that actually you have all these troubles in the world, and the only thing that's going to help at the end of the day is love. And the reason for this is God is love, and God made the world. God's the hope of the future, so love really is the only way. I love this passage. I think the only time I actually read it at a wedding was I was not officiating the wedding. My brother and sister-in-law, Tom and Margie, got married, and they asked me to read 1 Corinthians 13. Well, when I opened the Bible, I noticed the verse right before it at the end of chapter 12. It's really a preface to the chapter. Paul says, I will show you a still more excellent way. Right? Like I like that. I will show you a still more excellent way. What is this excellent way? It's not a feeling, although it might heal some of your feelings. Sometimes it's helpful to think about this in terms of nouns instead of adjectives. Instead of thinking love is patient, we could say love is patience, or patience is love. That's such a tricky one, isn't it? Like, don't you know people, and maybe you're one of them, they brag that they don't have any patience, right? You know, the type A people, they're like, I don't have any patience. I guess I'm kind of virtue, right? Like, I get things done. I demand results. I don't have any patience. But God is patient. Love is patience. Patience is love. Love is about keeping promises, making and keeping promises. Lewis Smedes once said that when you make and keep promises, you're like God. There's a ship you won't desert, if there's a cause you won't abandon, if there's somebody that you won't give up on, you're like God, because that's just how God is. God loves. Love is the making and keeping of promises. Church is I love this. Rowan Williams, when he was the Archbishop of Canterbury, said that the church is a school of love. Like, I can't think better a way to define what church ought to be about. Like, here's where you come to love. I mean, where else are you going to get that? Like, at your country club, do they teach you how to love? At the bank, do they teach you how to love? I mean, I don't think so, but here we learn how to love. Learn to love God, learn how to love each other. Love is patient and kind. This is so interesting. Love is not arrogant or rude. I mean, don't you get weary of all the arrogance and rudeness out there? And the tragedy of our society, right, is that we look at our political candidates and they're just arrogant and rude. And we think, he's the hope of the future because he is so arrogant and rude. Seriously? Love is not arrogant or rude. Jesus was not arrogant or rude. God is not arrogant or rude. How could arrogance and rudeness be our future, our hope? You see it in traffic. I'm always out there driving. I look at the person next to me. I want them to love me, but they're just arrogant and rude. And I'm trying to drive. There we are. Paul says, love does not insist on its own way. I'm about to go to our denomination's general conference. A week from Monday, I'll fly out to Portland. We have a quadrennial denominational meeting. I hate to disillusion you, but boy, it's ugly. I'm dreading it. Because what happens is there's delegates come from all over the world, and on the issues of the day, they have come to insist on their own way. I shall have it my way, and you are wrong. But to such a church, Paul said, you love. You don't insist on your own way. Paul says love is not irritable or resentful, and I love the New International Version translation of this. It says, love is not easily angered, and here's the best part. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Do you know people that do that? Right? Like, they got a little tally running in their head. Sometimes they'll dump it on you. You did this, and you did this, and you did this. Maybe actually you're one of those people. Maybe you're one of these people in the silence of your own head. You never actually say it to anybody, but there are people around you, you're thinking, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Paul says love does not keep a record of wrongs. In fact, if you're going to do some record keeping, there's something better. I've told you this before. Psychiatrists who have no interest in religion will say if you're suffering from anxiety or depression, if you want to make it a little bit better, doesn't cure it, but if you want to make it a little bit better, what you actually should do is keep a record, not of wrongs, but of lovely things that have happened. At the end of the day, if you do this, get a piece of paper and write down, here's some things that went really well today. Here's somebody who was nice to me today. Here's something I had to be grateful for today. If you do that every day, at the end of the day, your anxiety and depression get a little bit better. Love does not keep a record of wrongs. Love keeps a record of what you have to be grateful for. Love does not rejoice at wrong. I heard this talk the other day on kind of the banana peel thing, right? As you see somebody walking, this happens in the movies a lot, there's a banana peel, and you see it, but they don't. The person gets there, step on the banana peel, whoa, and they go hitting the deck. That happened to me at one of my first weddings, by the way. I came, and I wasn't accustomed to wearing a robe, and I came down to the front, and I got to the first step. I stepped on my robe and went, poosh, papers flying. People laughed. Like, thank you very much. Paul said, Love does not rejoice at wrong. We just rejoice at wrong all the time, right? It happens to politicians. A politician, they stumble to do something wrong, and we love that, don't we? Like, the governor of South Carolina is hiking the Appalachian Trail. No, he's in South America with his girlfriend. And we just dig that stuff all day long, don't we? I find myself, some big televangelist stumbles, I'm like, yes! What is that? It's not of God. Love does not rejoice at a stumble. Love does not rejoice at wrong. Love rejoices in what is right. Love bears all things, believes all things, endures all things. I'll close with this. I'm talking too long. Paul says this thing at the end where he says, when I was a child, I thought like a child and so on, but then I became a man, I gave up childish ways. He's talking about maturity. I didn't hear much talk about maturity. When I was growing up, there was a lot of talk about maturity. When are you going to be mature? I remember some teachers saying by the time you're 16, you should be mature. Punt on that, right? 16-year-olds, bless their hearts. And you can think, are you mature by the time you're 25 or by the time you're 40? I turned 60 this year. Am I mature yet? Don't you know 60-year-olds who are not very mature? I know some 83-year-olds who you want to say grow up, not mature. Yeah, Paul defines maturity as loving. It's the making and keeping of promises. It's patience. It's kindness. It's not being irritable. This is maturity. And he says this thing. He says, now we see, it gets translated different ways. Now we see through a glass darkly, but the Greek actually says, now we see in a mirror dimly. And it's interesting because Corinth is the place in the world where they made mirrors. And if you think about mirrors in the ancient world, like you probably at your home have a great mirror, it's clear. But in the ancient world, they didn't know how to do that yet. So what they would do is they'd take bronze and they would burnish it, and you look at it, you could kind of see yourself in it, but not very well. Like you didn't look great. And actually, if you have a mirror in your house now, like how great do you look? I like this exercise. Like some of you, we have good-looking people in this church. We really do. But how many of you, when you look in the mirror, you think, I look fantastic? Maybe if you had a couple of drinks, you might say that. But if you're sober, you look and think, I look fantastic. Actually, if you look at yourself closely in the mirror, I don't know, I think something happens because like you know. Like you know. And what Paul's saying, I think, is that like we see in a mirror, it doesn't look quite right, but God looks at you and God knows. God knows you better than you see yourself, but yet God loves. God sees all of you, and God is patient with you. God is kind to you. God is not irritable with you. God hopes all things for you. God endures all things with you. God hopes for you. It's cool. But if you get that, then you know how to look at the other person. And instead of being irritable, instead of being impatient, you can love. It's what Jesus people do. It is the still more excellent way. Thanks be to God. Hey, thank you for watching, and we hope you got something out of that. If you have any feedback for us, any response that was helpful to you, we would love to hear that. Please let us know. And everything that we put out is free, and we want it to be that way, but if you're able and feel led to support the mission of our church or the cost of providing this online content, here's how to do so.